Part 77. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguang Zi. Chapter 761. The next morning, mist filled the mountains and swamps, and the chirping of birds in the distant mountains reached the foot of the stone cliff, awakening the little sparrow sleeping in Su Buling's arms. The little sparrow poked its little head out from the lapel to look around, and then pecked Su Buling's chest twice with its beak. Well, it was considered a good morning bite. Su Buling had been in a state of sleepiness. He woke up naturally when there was movement in his arms. He looked at the sky and then looked to the side. Chen Xining was sitting on the ground 5 steps away, with her beautiful peach blossom eyes wide open. She looked at him with strange eyes and her face was a little red. After noticing that he looked over, she quickly turned her cheek away and coughed lightly. Su Buling was a little confused and was about to raise his hand, but suddenly he realized something was wrong. Juju and Chuchu were sleeping on him. It was late autumn and the weather was very cold in the early morning. He put his arms around their shoulders, and at some point, he put his hands inside. She slipped into Juju's lapel to keep warm. Her hands were warm and felt soft and greasy. Depending on the situation, the other hand also wanted to be stuffed into Choo-Choo's lapel, but Choo-Choo hugged her and just held it between the 2 balls. Su Buling blinked his eyes, his old face like a city wall blushed slightly, calmly took out his hands and said with a smile. "Your Highness, did you wake up so early?" Chen Xining's eyes were very strange. She stayed in the wilderness and was not very familiar with Su Buling and the others. She only slept for a short time in the middle of the night. When she woke up, she saw Su Buling sliding his hand into the girl's skirt and sliding her hand from the skirt. On the clothes, you can clearly see the big hand squeezing and rounding in the lapel. Hello everyone, our official account will find red envelopes of gold and coins every day. You can get them as long as you follow them. The last benefit at the end of the year, please seize the opportunity. Public account book Friends Base Camp. Chen Xining wanted to curse her, but the 2 women were both wives and concubines. It was definitely not frivolous to tease his wife, and it was probably unintentional to be half asleep and half awake. But doing it unintentionally in his sleep also proves that the cold and stern young man in front of him, who seems to be otherworldly, is not what he looks like, but he is actually very lustful in his heart. After all, it was a private matter, and no matter how Chen Xining felt about it, it was hard to comment. Seeing that Su Buling acted like nothing happened, she naturally didn't take the initiative to bring it up, but just said with a smile. "Yeah, I always sleep less." Su Buling took out his hand, and Zhongli's chest felt a little cooler, and he woke up naturally. He opened his eyes and was confused for a moment before he realized what he was doing. He quickly closed his clothes tightly and glared at Su Buling. Zhongli Chuchu also woke up, and she was not familiar with Chen Xining. She just glanced at him and stood up to put away her clothes. Su Buling first went to the stream at the foot of the hillside to wash up, and then took out dry food from his bag and had breakfast. Chen Xining brought some of her own and sat in front of her, stuttering. Although she was a bit talkative, it was hard for her to take the initiative to chat with 2 strange women in front of her. The little sparrow refused to sleep in Juju's arms, and it was obviously still angry. At this time, it jumped onto Chen Xining's arm. It was very obedient with a small mouth and was waiting for feeding, deliberately making Juju angry. It's just that Chen Xining is a dabbler in raising snakes. He doesn't know how to raise birds. Seeing Yi so close to her, he really likes her. I was afraid that the little sparrow would be spoiled by the snake's rations, so I looked around and saw a small, shiny black beetle lying on a stone, so I wanted to grab it and stuff it into Yi's mouth. Locking dragon goo. Fortunately, Yi knew what to do, but she didn't want the stupid young girl in front of her to be detoxified by a mixture of men and women. She quickly flew up, grabbed the little beetle, and threw it to the bottom of the hillside. Su Buletinling kept paying attention and did not interfere with the little sparrow's play. Anyway, the dragon locking goo was very strong and could not be killed by ordinary people. The four of them hadn't finished eating. Ah Ching, who had gone out to look for clues last night, ran back from outside and circled around Chen Xining. He was obviously trying to make amends for sneaking out and searched hard. Night. There was a hint of joy in Chen Xining's eyes, and she said, "We should have found the place. The lair of 100 Insect Valley is really here. Do you want me to go to the Kinzhou government now and transfer the officers and soldiers? 100 Insect Valley is a martial arts power that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Even if it declines, a skinny camel is still bigger than a horse." Chen Xining knew that Su Buling was highly skilled in martial arts, but the four of them just wanted to go straight to Huanglong and destroy the 100 Insect Valley, which was nothing more than a dream. The most reasonable arrangement now is to secretly mobilize officers and soldiers from Kinzhou to surround and kill them. But Su Buling's identity was here, and he knew that Dukan Guozhou Qin and even the second prince were related to Beikong Valley, so how could he use South Vietnam soldiers and horses? The Ziliang army has not yet reached South Vietnam, and even if it arrives in a short time, it will not be able to kill here. He shook his head and said, "If the government makes any move, it will definitely alert the enemy. I'm just here to save people. We can deal with the matter of destroying Baichong Valley after I rescue the people." Chen Xining nodded slightly. Anyway, as long as he found the location of his lair, it wouldn't be too late to come over and suppress the bandits when the arrangements were made. Now that we have found the location, it is definitely better to go and investigate sooner rather than later. Su Buling took out the package, took out the soft armor, arm guards, etc., and started to make preparations. Zhongli Jiju and Chu Chu held hands beside them. The last time Chen Xining went to the prison, she heard that someone could resist the dragon lock goo and wanted to know how. Naturally, she started to pay attention at this time. After seeing the neatly folded oilcloth chemical protective clothing and bird head mask on the ground, she walked over and looked at it carefully. "Mr. Su, is this the way you used to force yourself through the poisonous mist of the locking dragon goo?" Su Buling put on black leather gloves and said with a smile, "A secret that is not told." Oh. Chen Xining also knew that this kind of self-defense treasure was a top secret in the world, and casual snooping could lead to death, so he gave up the thought of picking it up and studying it carefully, but when he saw the baby adult System 5 on the bird head mask, after a small word, he asked a little doubtfully. "Young master looks young. He already has children." Zhongli Jiju also saw that Chen Xining had many problems, and chuckled at this time. "I don't have a biological one, but I have a goddaughter." Su Buring raised his eyebrows and looked at his silly wife. "When did I have a goddaughter?" Zhongli Jiju was naturally embarrassed to say that Chu Chu was going to call her mother, so she just smiled weirdly. Zhongli Chuchu really had nothing to do with this master, and said with wide eyes, "Xiaju, please be serious and don't interrupt." While chatting and laughing, Su Buling packed up his gear. He put on soft armor, wrist guards, leggings, etc. on his hands, feet, and torso. He was basically immune to snake and insect bites. He folded his chemical protective clothing and mask and put them on his waist. Chen Xining was also ready, put Ah Ching on the ground, and the four of them went down the hillside together and continued to move deeper into the mountains to the east. After accidentally suffering a loss yesterday, Zhongli Jiju became more cautious. She took various refreshing drugs in advance and carefully checked every step to ensure that nothing went wrong. Halfway through, the little white snake also came back from the front, and the results of the investigation were obviously the same as Ah Cheng's. Su Buletinling and the four others followed the two snakes all the way over the mountains and ridges. They walked about 10 miles. When the sun was 3 poles high, they came to the outskirts of a mountain. The mountains are surrounded by dense forests, and there is a miasma visible to the naked eye. It seems that no one has set foot there since Pangu opened the sky. Zhongli Jeju observed the terrain and pointed to the south slope of the mountain. The miasma seems to be a natural formation, but on the sunny slopes, there are several vegetation and other areas that are not affected by the miasma. They are obviously not infected by the poisonous miasma. They are ventilation holes left by humans. The valley of insects is right under your feet. But from the perspective of ventilation, it definitely won't fit through the mouth. Chen Xining couldn't see much from the terrain. When she heard that 100 Insect Valley was at her feet, she frowned slightly. Isn't it a bit reckless to rush in without knowing the details? Su Buling glanced twice. Find the entrance first. I will go in alone to check the situation. You guys will take care of me outside. Zhongli's master and apprentice knew Su Buling's martial arts, and as long as he was not poisoned, there was no place he couldn't go in the world, so they all nodded. Chen Xining was a little worried. It's too dangerous to go in alone, Before he finished speaking, Su Buring led the two girls into the woods. Seeing this, Chen Xining didn't have much to say and followed silently. The two little snakes had been searching Yulong Ridge for half the night and had already touched the area clean. At this time, they walked silently in front and brought Su Buring to a cave hidden in a secluded part of the mountain. Su Buling observed carefully with the telescope, and could see that there were two men in black standing inside the cave. They should be sentry posts, but no one had come to this place for several years, and the alertness was very low. They just held their arms and chatted. After discovering a living person, the four of them breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that they had found a place. Su Buling carried a straight knife on his back, raised his hand to stop the three girls, and jumped out of the grass alone, approaching the cave quickly like a snake. When they were a few steps away, two poisonous needles spilled out from their hands, hitting the necks of the two sentries. The poisonous needle was prepared by Jeju, and the two sentries slowly softened without making any move. Su Buling took a glance and made sure there was no one else in the cave. He entered the cave before the sentries fell to the ground. He raised his hands to support the two sentries and slowly placed them on the ground to avoid making any noise. There are many poisonous scorpions outside the cave, and there is a deep corridor inside. You can faintly see the firelight and human figures in the deepest part. After Su Buling glanced at them for a few times, he raised his hand and waved, and the three girls came to the cave as light as a swallow. Zhongli Jeju and Chu Chu arranged poison and traps around the cave. Su Buling took off the black clothes of the sentry, put them on himself, and entered the dimly lit tomb passage with the knife. You guys wait here, don't be impulsive, I'll go in and take a look. Chen Xining put her hand on the handle of the knife, wanting to go in with Su Buling, but Su Buling didn't mean to take her with him. After hesitating for a while, he still didn't go up to cause trouble, but just leaned at the entrance and watched carefully. Su Buling walked into the deep tomb passage and stepped on the floor tiles with his boots. After testing, he stepped firmly to avoid touching the mechanism. However, Su Buling walked more than 10 feet in the tomb passage, and the fire in front became clearer and clearer. Everything was as usual, and he didn't encounter anything. It was as if the door was open and waiting for him to come in. Too much success is never a good thing. Su Bulenling frowned, feeling something was not right, and stopped. At this moment, the sound of a loudspeaker sounded in the deep passage, and Sikongji's hoarse voice came. Close the door quickly. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 762. Kakaka. Sikongji had been silent for so long, waiting for Su Buling to reach a position where he could not get out. After giving the order, a stone wall fell from above at the tomb passage 10 feet away behind Su Buling. Su Buling's face changed slightly and he rushed towards the exit without hesitation. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful his explosive power was, it was difficult to leap 10 feet away in an instant. Chen Xining had been watching carefully outside the tomb passage. When she saw the stone wall falling, she secretly thought that something was wrong. Her body was like a violent female leopard. In an instant, she came to the stone wall near the exit. She clasped the bottom of the falling stone wall with her fingers and groaned. With a sound, his face turned blood red in an instant, and he actually stopped the huge boulder. "Come back quickly." As soon as the words came out, Su Buling also came to the other side of the stone wall, swept away the arrows shot from behind with a straight knife, clasped the boulder with one hand, and the two of them worked together to lift the stone wall up. At this moment, under the chain reaction of the mechanism, the giant door stone at the entrance of the tomb also fell down. Jeju and Chuchu were not slow to react. They started almost at the same time as Chen Xining. However, Chen Xining had half a master's combat power and his martial arts skills were much higher than Jeju. When Chen Xining forcibly stopped the boulder, the two of them ran more than half the distance. Seeing the huge stone falling from behind, Zhongli Jeju's expression changed. However, she and Chu Chu joined forces and were unable to stop the huge door stone. Lifting it by force was tantamount to death, and they could only watch helplessly as the escape route was blocked. Boom! After the loud noise, all four people were blocked in the tomb passage. Su Buling held a straight knife to block the rain of arrows and lifted the boulder with one hand. Seeing that the retreat was blocked, he looked deep into the tomb passage in a blink of an eye. Chen Xiling's face turned pale, but the warrior was very courageous and did not show any panic. He just gritted his teeth and helped to lift the stone wall and said urgently, "What to do now? Get out." At the exit deep in the tomb passage, Sikongji, who was wearing a black robe, showed his figure with a cane, and a hoarse voice came out. "Prince Su, I have been waiting for you for a long time." Chen Xining was stunned for a moment when she heard Crown Prince Su. At first, she was confused that there was no crown prince named Su in Nanyu, but she realized it in an instant. Martial arts and divine skills, face like a crown jade. Do you agree? Chen Xining's eyes were stunned as she looked at the man so close. A few days ago, she had heard that the Su family army was heading south in large numbers, preparing to invade South Vietnam. Why was Su Buling here? The situation was too urgent and there was no time for Chen Xining to think about it carefully. Seeing that there was no way to escape, Su Buling raised his hand and pushed Chen Xining, pushing her directly in front of Jeju, and at the same time let go of the stone wall in his hand. "What you do?" Chen Xining was pushed and staggered. Seeing the stone wall falling and the tall figure turning to face the huge underground palace, Chen Xining felt anxious. But when she stabilized her body, before she could step forward to stop her, the stone wall had already fallen. After a muffled sound of dong, the narrow tomb passage became quiet, and only the sounds deep in the tomb passage could be vaguely heard. The three girls were locked inside, feeling panicked. Zhongli Chuchu ran to the stone wall and slapped it hard. "Promise, come back." Zhongli Jeju forced himself to calm down, took out the fire folding book for lighting, and looked for the mechanism to open the door in the tomb passage. Chen Xining drew out her sword and prepared to lift up the stone wall. However, once the stone wall fell to the ground, there was no place to grab a hand. She could only pry it open with a knife. She could only use the knife to split the stone wall and prepare to chisel it. Create a gap that can be grasped. As the stone wall fell, the retreat was completely blocked, and the other side of the stone wall became quiet. More than 300 disciples of the 100 Insect Valley, armed with weapons, emerged from all over the underground palace, watching eagerly. Countless poisonous snakes, scorpions, and bats roamed the underground palace, choosing people to eat. In the wooden cage where the coolies were imprisoned on the side, Aunt Gui and Ahu felt chilled when they saw this scene. Ahu lay on the fence, staring at the deep tomb and said, "Grandma, if someone comes, is it us?" Aunt Gui shook her head and sighed, feeling only worried. "So what? No matter who comes, if their escape route is blocked, they can't escape. Jeju came here to die for an old guy like her. She didn't even think it was worth it, but what could she do? In the small square outside the tomb passage, Sikongji and Guling stood in front, staring at the figures deep in the tomb passage. Having almost fallen into a trap with no way to escape, Sikongji was not in a hurry and did not rush in rashly. He just said outside, "Prince Su, don't engage in unnecessary arguments. It won't be good for you." Cha-cha-cha. The sound of the tip of the knife rubbing against the stone bricks sounded from the deep tomb passage. Soon, Su Buling, dressed in black, walked out from the depths of the tomb passage, wearing a mask on his head, and scanned the dense crowds and poisonous substances in the underground palace. The more than 300 members of the 100 Konggu Valley may have heard of Su Buling's name, but in their own territory, there are so many people, so why should they be afraid? They were all outflanked with knives, and slowly surrounded them. Su Buling turned a blind eye to the swordsmen and axemen around him. He gently scratched the stone bricks with his straight knife and walked towards Sikongji, whom he had met once before. "You are very brave. Have you South Vietnamese never learned the phrase lead the wolf into the house?" His voice was calm with a hint of unruliness, as if the hundreds of people in the underground palace didn't exist, and there was only one Sikongji in his eyes. Sikongji was sure of victory, took a step forward with his cane, and spoke very politely. "It's really offending to invite His Highness here rashly. I, Bai Konggu, have no ill intentions. I just want to ask His Highness to do something. As long as His Highness agrees, you and the 3 girls outside will be safe and sound." Su Buling walked slowly and looked directly into Sikongji's eyes. "Are you worthy of negotiating terms with me? Don't you know how much you weigh?" Sikongji and Su Buling had fought each other almost instantly, so they were definitely qualified to negotiate terms in the arena. But after entering the beast trap in 100 Insect Valley, Sikongji had the initiative, so how could he hold on to his chivalrous spirit and challenge Su Buling in a one-on-one fight? The third elder, Guling, saw that Su Buling was so arrogant after becoming a fish on the chopping block, he couldn't help but said angrily, "How brave are you? Do you really think that Baichong Valley is your back garden, where you can come and go as you please?" Su Buling continued to walk forward and shook his head. "My garden is not so dilapidated. You." As soon as these words came out, the hundreds of core disciples of 100 Insect Valley were all furious. Sikongji raised his hand to stop the disciples from talking and said, "I would also like to ask His Highness the Crown Prince to be aware of current affairs. If you are dead or injured, it will also be a loss to me, Baekong Valley. As long as His Highness the Crown Prince takes this pill, you can leave now. Those 5 relatives and friends, Baekong Valley, have always taken good care of placement can also be taken away together." While Sikongji was speaking, he took out a pill from his sleeve. But Su Buling's steps didn't stop and he had arrived at the center of the underground palace, only 30 steps away from Sikongji. Reading welfare. Follow the public account book Friends Base Camp and get cash/coins for reading every day. Sikongji has been walking around in the world for many years and has seen Su Buling's skills, so it is easy to know how to keep a distance. Afraid that Su would not be ordered to attack Qin Wang alone, his voice was a bit colder. "If His Royal Highness goes forward, you won't blame me for being rude?" Su Buling raised his chin slightly and said calmly, "How can you be so polite?" Sikongji and Guling's expressions darkened. Seeing Su Bulenling walking forward in a swaggering manner with no intention of stopping, they could only stamp their canes. "Do it, keep alive." "Yes." More than 300 Baekagu disciples who surrounded the small square gave the order and swooped forward with weapons in hand. Many others threw tripwires, fishing nets, etc., in an attempt to subdue the arrogant Su Bulenling. But just as everyone made a move, the man strutting around in the underground palace suddenly disappeared. Sikongji could clearly see Su Buling's movements, his expression suddenly changed, and he pulled Guling back and flew back. Kill! Cha! As soon as he finished speaking, there was a flash of sword light, and the two disciples beside Sikongji were cut into pieces. The two disciples didn't even see the movement clearly, they just looked at the bloody waist and legs with confusion, and then screamed after a moment. Ah! Kill! The huge underground palace suddenly became noisy. Su Buling snatched the sword from the hands of the people from the 100 Insect Valley sect who had been dismembered. Holding the sword in both hands, he rushed directly into the crowd like a black whirlwind rolling up in the underground palace. Wherever he passed, blood and flesh flew everywhere, no matter who touched it. They died immediately, and a few people who reacted slowly were kicked in the head before they saw where the person was. Su Buling suddenly burst into flames, and countless venomous snakes and bats were driven towards Su Buling. However, no matter how much poison there was, it was useless to break through the defense. The hundreds of disciples who were so aggressive just now could not even touch the corners of their clothes. There is no ability to parry at all. The scene, like a tiger entering a flock of sheep, not only shocked the Byakugan disciples who underestimated the combat power of Wukui, but also shocked the onlookers in the wooden cage. Who had a big mouth and didn't even dare to blink, because in the blink of an eye, a dozen of the men in black who had insulted them over the past few months would die. He said in disbelief. "Grandma, look, this hero, no, this god is so powerful. We are saved." Aunt Kui's already desperate heart also ignited a little hope. She sat up a little straighter and even her eyes became a little brighter. It seems that he is the grandson of General Su Lai. He is worthy of being an outstanding figure of our generation. Jeju has found a good husband. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 763. What to do, what to do. In the narrow tomb passage, the three girls were trapped. Even the little sparrow was a little panicked, flying around looking for the exit. Zhongli stamped his feet anxiously, but stamping his feet obviously couldn't solve the problem. Chen Xining used a knife to chisel at the stone wall. The stone was too hard and the scimitar was not easy to dig. It was difficult to carve out a gap for grasping in a short time. Chen Xining was afraid that she would die inside sooner or later, so she moved harder and harder, even the tiger's mouth burst open and oozed blood. Zhongli Jeju helped with a dagger, his face getting paler and paler, and he regretted calling Su Buling to come to South Vietnam. She could die, but if Su Buling, a woman like her, was buried in such a small place, even she would feel it was not worth it. She would not have the shame to face the many girls in her family after she died. Shocking shouts and screams could be heard from behind the stone wall, and the three of them were all worried. And there were more than 3 girls who were anxious in the underground palace. There! Ah! Run quickly! Within the vast underground palace, within just 1 cup of tea, corpses were piled up on the small square. It was impossible to count how many people had died, because not a single corpse was complete. Some unlucky disciples were even chopped into more than a dozen pieces, or their heads were kicked into pieces of meat mixed with bones. The mixture dyed the entire center of the underground palace black-red, and blood flowed into the 10,000 snake cave along the gaps in the stone slabs. Middle. The cave of 10,000 snakes has been opened, and countless venomous snakes crawled out of it, crawling densely from stone bricks, pillars, and walls towards the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood. It's just that Su Buletinling is more than 10 feet away, his movements are so fast that no one can see them clearly, and snakes, insects, rats and ants can't even catch up. How can he talk about it? In a short period of time, more than 100 disciples were killed by the 2 swords. The remaining 200 disciples were frightened by this scene. Even Sikangji and Guling turned pale. As Jianghu people, they have naturally heard that the sword master Zhu Zhoushan and the head of the Lu family were surrounded and suppressed by the Daio court. They killed 700 to 800 enemies in the rebel army and remained unscathed until they died of exhaustion and poisoning. These are the words from the storyteller's mouth. According to the convention in the world, one can only believe half of them. Even Sikangji feels that it is impossible to be so exaggerated when manpower is limited. Moreover, the disciples of Beikong Valley are all martial arts practitioners. Even if their martial arts skills are not high, they are much more powerful than ordinary weapons and armor, and they are enough to deal with Su Buling. But Sikangji obviously doesn't understand that in the eyes of Grandmaster Wu Kuei, the only ones who can catch his eye are top-notch masters like Zhang Xiang. The warriors below are not much different from the unarmed women and children. Because their strength is too small, their movements are too slow, and their reactions are too unresponsive. An ant with a knife is still an ant. You can never win by relying on numbers. This is why Zhu Chong was killed. The master of Yamashiliu must be trapped first, and then exhausted to death using the human sea tactic. And the Su Buletinling in front of him was even more tyrannical than Zhu Kishan back then. 2 years ago, he could equal 1 to 1,000. Obviously a bit wishful thinking. For the members of the 100 Insect Valley, even if the poison-quenched weapon can stab Su Buling once, the battle will be settled, but the distance is the distance between an ordinary person and a master. Countless warriors throughout the ages have never crossed it in their entire lives. There were also people who kept throwing flying knives, poisonous needles, and other hidden weapons, but many buildings in the underground palace had complex terrain, and Su Buling could not be injured even if he relied on walls, stone pillars, and buildings. The only thing that can limit a grandmaster is the frontier army's crossbow formation firing thousands of arrows, which is obviously not available in the underground palace. The screams in the underground palace are endless, just like Shura Purgatory. If nothing unexpected happens, Su Buling, who is running rampant in the underground palace, can kill everyone in the underground palace in less than 2/4 of an hour, and there is still some power left. The third elder, Guling, held his sword and did not dare to rush up at all. He quickly retreated to the rear and said urgently, "Second brother, this guy is too arrogant. We can't defeat him. The situation is over. Run." Sikangji had already seen that the underground palace was full of disciples from 100 Insect Valley, and the poisonous smoke could not be released indiscriminately. Su Buling was wearing those strange clothes, so it might not be effective if he released them. As for all kinds of poisons, people didn't pay attention to them. If they had known earlier, they shouldn't have released Su Buling from the tomb passage. They should have shot arrows outside and blocked Su Buling in the tomb passage. Now that they had lured the wolf into the house, Sikangji also wanted to run away, but in order to catch a turtle in a urn, all the exits had been blocked to prevent Su Buletinling from sneaking in secretly, leaving only the front entrance. Now that the main entrance is blocked, they have become turtles in a urn. Where can they run? Sikangji held the cane and gritted his teeth. There is no way to retreat. This battle is related to the prosperity and decline of 100 Insect Valley. No matter how high the price is, Su Buling must be restrained. As long as I pierce his clothes, I will have a solution. After saying that, he flew up, waved his cane at Su Buling, and said angrily, "Together." Essay. Before Sikangji finished speaking, a shrill sword cry suddenly sounded in the chaotic underground palace. The people of the 100 Insect Valley who fled in panic saw a flash of cold light in the underground palace, and a black-clothed Shura wearing a bird head mask used a knife as a sword and pierced towards Sikangji in the air. This sword is so fast that it seems to be able to shake mountains and destroy cities. Su Buling had fought against Sikangji and had already missed once, saving his life. How could he be careless again? The moment Sikangji started to pounce on him, Su Buling moved the mountain without any reservation, going straight to Sikongji's heart. Like all warriors who encountered the sword for the first time, Sikongji's eyes were filled with disbelief and astonishment. He watched helplessly as the sword edge came in front of him, but he had no time to dodge. Cha! The straight knife pierced through Sikongji's skinny body. The amazing force contained in the blade caused the skinny Sikongji's entire back to explode directly, and the spinal bones flew out, injuring the disciples following behind. Su Buling twisted the single knife in his hand hard, and Sikongji on the blade was torn into pieces, blood and flesh flew, and merged with the stones on the ground before he could even scream. Second brother. Second elder. No money to read novels? Send you cash or points, limited to 1 day to receive. Follow the public account book Friends Base Camp, free. After seeing this scene, many disciples of Baekong Valley were silent for a moment. It was hard to believe that Sikongji, one of the 7 stars of Nanyu, became a pile of rotten meat before he could even finish a sentence. The silence quickly disappeared, replaced by despair and fear from the bottom of his heart. Even Sikongji is dead. Who else can they rely on in this underground palace? Run! Ah! The screams resounded throughout the underground palace, like a lamb in a cage, hiding from a butcher holding a sharp knife. You have to see who is the dog before you close the door and beat the dog. Su Buling's eyes were calm. He didn't stay on Sikongji's body for a moment, and continued to kill the remnants of the 100 Insects Valley who were fleeing everywhere. Su Buling had already seen the people locked in wooden cages, the skeletons in the 10,000 snake cave, and the bodies that were dismembered for experiments in the back. These are all the people of Nanyu. They may have nothing to do with him, the Prince of Daewoo, but the superiors should protect the people of the whole world under their wings. If the people in power also treat the people of Daewoo and the people of Nanyu differently, what is the unification? Therefore, in his eyes, all the people in the 100 Insects Valley in the underground palace were not human beings at all. He came to eradicate the weeds that Emperor Xiaozong had not completely weeded out before the 60th year. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 764. Ah! Where? The shouts of death behind the stone wall became smaller and smaller, until no movement could be heard, as if the fighting was over. The 3 girls in the tomb passage, their hearts have hit rock bottom. They had tried every means to open the stone wall just now, but they did not dare to open it now because they were afraid that if they opened it, they would face Su Buling's body or the heavy weight of Baichong Valley. Weapons. Zhongli Jeju knew the purpose of Baekago and would definitely not kill Su Buling, but swords and guns have no eyesight, let alone poison. If he accidentally misses. Zhongli Jeju didn't dare to think about it at all. Her shoulders couldn't help but tremble. She bit her lower lip and didn't dare to speak. She just held onto the gap cut under the stone wall and lifted it up with all her strength. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were already red, and he knelt down to help. However, his martial arts skills were not very good, so he couldn't do much, so he could only keep comforting himself. It's okay, it must be okay. Chen Xining and Su Buling had no emotional entanglement. They just put Su Buling on the spot as a chivalrous man with unparalleled benevolence and righteousness. Naturally, he was worried about Su Buling's life and death. Now that he learned that Su Buling was the Prince of Daewoo, he felt even more anxious. After all, if King Su's only son died in South Vietnam without any explanation, South Vietnam would not be able to bear the bloody revenge of the Daewoo court. Ah! Chen Xining squatted in the middle, grabbed the stone wall with all her strength, let out a light sigh, and tried her best to lift it up. With the combined efforts of the 3 of them, a gap appeared in the 1,000-pound stone wall, and what came out first was a pool of blood. The smell of blood spread, and Chen Xining's face turned a little whiter. He gritted his teeth and lifted the heavy stone wall with all his strength. Several corpses fell down from behind the wall. There were no wounds on their bodies, but blood flowed from their mouths and noses. They were actually those who had been killed. Crowded to death. Lifting the stone wall to the height of his face, Chen Shining discovered that the back of the stone wall was blocked by a wall of corpses. Blood flowed from between the corpses, and it was unknown how thick it was accumulated. Even though they were from martial arts backgrounds, Zhongli Jiju and Chu Chu were also shocked and turned pale, and even felt a little nauseous. Chen Shining also felt uncomfortable. She was overwhelmed with pressure on her chest and abdomen. She lifted the heavy stone wall with her shoulders and said, "Remove the body quickly, Sister Zhong and I are holding onto the rocks." Zhongli Chuchu couldn't use much strength at first, and he didn't care about the bloody scene at this time. He used all his strength to push apart the piled corpses. A total of more than 20 giant corpses were removed. Only then did the light come out in front, and he could see the silence behind. The underground palace. Chen Shining gritted his teeth and moved to the other side of the stone wall, letting go of the stone wall with Zhongli Jiju at the same time, and then jumped directly over the body. Chen Shining had the best martial arts skills and the fastest movements. He rushed out of the tomb passage almost instantly. When he looked up, he was shocked by the purgatory-like scene of Shura in the underground palace. In the dimly lit underground palace, there was no noise at all, only the sound of rustling, the sound of tens of thousands of poisons on the ground eating flesh and blood. The ground was dark red, with a layer of corpses spread out on it. Even the houses and pillars had many stumps hanging on them. At a glance, there was no complete corpse. Chen Shining has never seen such a horrific scene before. Even in a tragic battlefield, it is impossible to fight to this extent. It is completely like a slaughterhouse. The blood is beyond ordinary people's cognition. Even Chen Shining, a warrior, rushed to the scene. Palpitations and chills. Chen Shining ignored these tragic images and anxiously searched for traces of Su Buling in the sea of blood and corpses. But when she looked up and saw the top step of the underground palace, she was suddenly stunned. "I saw a few torches glowing dimly on the steps leading to the depths of the underground palace." The tall man in a bloody robe stood quietly, with a blood-dropping knife inserted into a corpse at hand, and he was drinking from a wine jar he found from nowhere. The mist was steaming from his body, and the wine and sweat were sliding down his chin, making a tick-tick-tick sound. In the entire underground palace, there was only one person and a knife standing there. "Oh my God!" Zhongli Jiju also ran over. When he saw the scene in front of him, he also stopped in shock and looked at his man in disbelief. Chen Shining was awakened by the voice, and she felt a little confused while holding the silver moon scimitar. She glanced twice before speaking. "Master Su, where have our enemies gone?" Su Buling was so tired that he regained his breath after drinking half a jar of wine. When he saw Chen Shining coming out, he wiped the corners of his mouth and motioned to the stones on the ground. "You're all lying here, there shouldn't be any fish that can slip through the net. Jingle. Don't have money to read novels? You will receive cash or points for a limited time of 1 day. Follow the public account book Friends Base Camp and get it for free." Chen Shining opened her mouth wide and the scimitar fell to the ground. Su Buring ignored Chen Shining, threw away the wine jar, pulled out the straight knife on the ground, and walked towards the wooden cage hanging on the side. "Jiju, come here quickly, be careful of the poisonous insects and weapons on the ground." The voice was a bit breathy, but very calm, as if he had just come home from a run and asked his wife to cook. Chen Shining stared blankly at the back, raised her hand and pinched herself a few more times. After confirming that there was no Chinese medicine to hallucinate, her eyes showed indescribable shock. "Is this a humming human being? Hundreds of people, just 2/4 of an hour. Hundreds of pigs would not die so quickly." Zhongli Jiju understood how exaggerated Su Buling's fighting prowess was, but in the past, he had watched Su Buling fight one-on-one, and this was the first time for this group fight. After being stunned for a moment, he held up his skirt and ran over with admiration in his eyes. Zhongli Chuchu's reaction was similar to that of Chen Xining. Even though he had been with Su Buling for a long time, he was still often frightened by Su Buling's inhuman methods. Fortunately, there is only one Su Buling in the world, otherwise, ordinary warriors would have no face to live. Zhongli Chuchu pursed her lips and followed her master with admiration. After Zhongli Juju came over, Su Buling raised his hand and hooked Juju's shoulders to relax his legs and feet. In the past, when he fought with Sidu Yuejin and Xuechenzi, although the scene was extremely dangerous, the actual fighting time was only a few breaths. And killing more than 300 martial artists, although it was not as dangerous as fighting with Wu Kuei, you still have to do your best, which is equivalent to high intensity and intense exercise for half an hour, which is definitely not easy. The muscles of the hands and feet are all strained. To be honest, if you hold on for a while, you will have sequelae. While Zhongli Juju relieved Su Buling's muscle fatigue, he came to the bottom of dozens of wooden cages. The hundreds of hard workers in the wooden cages had been stunned for a long time. Maybe they knew that they had a chance to get out alive. After Su Buling came over, they began to whimper and cry. Those who were a little more awake knelt down and kowtowed to beg to let them out. In the wooden cage where Aunt Gui was, the three men also woke up and called out to Juju with tears in their eyes. Ahu was able to vent his grievances for the past few months. He could not suppress his emotions at this time and slapped the cage frantically. Aunt Gui was in poor health and did not get up. She just looked at Juju and Su Buling and smiled. Aunt Gui. Zhongli Juju saw the ragged appearance of her relatives and burst into tears. She quickly ran to the side, grabbed the chain, and pulled the cage over. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangguang Zi. Chapter 765. The underground palace is buried deep underground, and the air is very cold. Although the stone door blocking the tomb passage has been opened, the narrow passage is difficult to dispel the smell in the underground palace. The ground is full of residual limbs and poisons, exuding the pungent smell of blood, making it almost difficult to find the underground palace. Get a foothold. Chen Xining walked to the vicinity of 10,000 Snake Cave and looked at Su Buling, who was rescuing the people in the cage. The shock in his eyes did not dissipate. Even as his mind cleared, he felt more and more unbelievable. Chen Xining only had contact with Su Buling a few times. In her initial influence, Su Xining was just a wanderer, with strong martial arts skills but clear grudges, an aloof personality but not bullying. Even if he caught her snake and forced her to when doing things, he also uses necessary means within the rules. He can be said to be a very principled knight. Then, when they met again on Chaohuang Street, Chen Xining was shocked at that time. She didn't expect that this martial arts warrior would be so handsome. Chen Xining just felt that this god was really unfair. And now, I learned that this handsome guy who is skilled in martial arts and looks like an immortal is actually the young master of the most powerful warlord in Daiyue, and is currently the talker of the entire Central Plains Empire. As the third princess of Nanyu, Chen Xining has naturally heard of Su Buling's name, because Nanyu was beaten badly by the Su family, and Nanyu has always been somewhat hostile to the Su family. Moreover, the rumors about Su Buling were not all good. Basically, he killed wherever he went, and he looked like a fierce second-generation ancestor. Even if he had a few small poems, it would be difficult for him to spread to South Vietnam where the cultural context was not prosperous. In Chen Xining's impression, Su Buling should be a cold tyrant with an unruly personality and avoid strangers, the type who could scare his servants to death even if he took a breath. But the calm man in front of her made her feel no danger at all. Instead, she felt a sense of security, making it impossible for her to connect him with the aloof Su Buling. However, with the facts before his eyes, Chen Xining couldn't help but believe it. After looking at it for a moment, he could only sigh in his heart, why did he get all the good things by himself? Seeing the people being released from the wooden cages, Chen Xining did not help. Naturally, she was a little embarrassed at this time, so she took the initiative to ask for help, and together with Chu Chu, took the people released outside the underground palace to avoid being poisoned. Accidental injury. After Su Buling released everyone in the wooden cage, he came to the steps of the underground palace. 5 relatives and friends from Fai Shuling sat together, and the 3 men were silent before they could recover. Aunt Gui, who had snow-white hair, had long since turned away from life and death. Her emotions did not fluctuate much, and she just held Ju's hand. Ju's hand spoke some words of concern. Zhongli Jiju changed her usual charming look and checked Aunt Gui's pulse beside her. Her expression was demure, like a virtuous and sensible young woman from a good family, comforting Aunt Gui with a smile. Su Buling came to the front, and before he could say hello, Lang Ahu, a tiger-headed young man next to him, ran over with admiration in his eyes. "Brother Su, you were so powerful just now, just like a god." Aunt Ju didn't know what kind of luck she had to find such a good husband-in-law like you. Zhongli Jiju's expression froze, and he waved his hand and hit Ahu on the back of the head. "Can you speak?" "Guan is stupid, right?" Ahu was trembling so hard that he quickly covered his head and ran away. Aunt Gui was not in good health, but she still showed a grateful smile on her face. She let Jiju help her stand up, nodded and saluted. The young prince, with his rich body, traveled all the way to South Vietnam to take risks for a few of us poor people in remote areas. "I don't even know how to thank you." Aunt Gui's gratitude came from the bottom of her heart. She knew that Jiju and Chuchu were with the prince's son, but no matter how beautiful a woman was, without any family background, she could only be a concubine at most if she entered a prince's house. If something happens to the concubine's natal family, the head of the family can ask the housekeeper and guard to come over and say hello. This is already considered as a best effort. To take the risk and come over in person to settle the matter is, to be honest, it is just a fool's errand. However, Su Buling did this, which also proved that Su Buling regarded Jiju as his married wife, regardless of high or low, or between each other. As the son of a prince, being able to do this would be enough to impress any woman. Although Zhongli Jiju didn't say it, she didn't understand these truths in her heart. She used to think about fighting for the top spot, but now she is the 11th one. She has no complaints anymore. After all, she understands that she is in Su Buling's heart. Position, what else is there to fight for? Now that her family are all safe and sound, Zhongli Jiju has also put down the big stone in her heart. She wishes she could take good care of Su Buling for a few months now, not to mention tails and bells, and she can even play with Chuchu's tails. However, in the underground palace, there is obviously no way to sleep together, so we have to talk about these things after returning to the village. Zhongli Jiju supported Aunt Gui and said with a smile, "We are all one family. I just came to thank him. He is the son-in-law of our village." There is no reason for Aunt Gui to salute him. Naturally, Su Buletinling didn't do this just to express his gratitude verbally. Seeing Jiju's heart falling to the ground, Chu Chu also secretly glanced at her with admiration, feeling satisfied in her heart. After chatting with Aunt Gui for a while, Chu Chu and Chen Xining returned to the underground palace and took Aunt Gui and others to the ground. After sending several waves in a row, the underground palace was already empty. Su Buling took the torch from the steps and prepared to burn this nest that should not exist in the world to the ground. However, Zhongli Jiju obviously had other ideas. He pulled Su Buling and said softly, "We'll burn it later and buy a few things before we leave." To put it bluntly, poison is a drug that has a counter effect on people. Sometimes poison can also save lives, so the poison master of South Vietnam must also be a master of medicine, and his body is full of treasures. Zhongli Jiju looked at the sea of corpses for a few times and asked, "Where is Sikongji's body?" Su Buling raised his hand and pointed to the steps. There is a piece there, and there should be a leg there. There is also a hand on the roof. Well, if we put it together a little, we should be able to put it together. Zhongli Jiju's eyes showed a bit of helplessness. She couldn't say that her husband was too heavy-handed. She could only take Su Buling's gloves and gas mask, put them on her head, and then search among the limbs on the ground. The little beetle has been hovering around Zhongli Jiju to prevent the poisonous insects from getting close to her. Because it is sensitive to other poisonous insects, it is also helping Jiju to point to this location. After searching for a while, Zhongli Jiju found 2 small bottles in a torn cloak. One was as black as ink, and it was unknown what it was made of. Zhongli Jiju raised her hand and shook it, and the sound of flapping wings came from inside. She looked happy. It's Sikongji's dragon locking goo. The little beetle obviously sensed the presence of its opponent, and now lay on the bottle cap, trying to get in, but Sikongji's dragon locking goo was much older than the little beetle, and the little beetle would definitely become a tonic if it went in. Zhongli Jiju was reluctant to let the little beetle, who had been raised well, eat the weak and prey on the strong, and sighed again. It's a pity that there can only be one Goo King. They will fight to the death when they meet, and they can't make a pair. Give this dragon locking goo to Chu-Chu, she doesn't have anything to protect herself. Su Buling nodded and looked at another small porcelain bottle. Put it together with the dragon locking goo, it should be a very important thing. What's in it? Crazy King goo. Zhongli Jiju looked at it for a few times. It can't be the Crazy King goo. I just saw those crazy people behind, and they are completely different from the real Crazy King goo. The 100 Insects Valley should not have researched it yet. While speaking, Zhongli Jiju carefully opened the porcelain bottle, but there were dozens of brown pills in it. She wore leather gloves and picked up a pill to look at it carefully, but she couldn't tell what it was. She could only put it away and go back to study it slowly. Su Buling accompanied Zhongli Jiju to search the huge underground palace. After collecting the precious medicinal herbs and poisonous insects they could find, they poured the tung oil for lighting on the ground. As the torch was thrown down, the flames blazed from the sea of corpses and blood. Su Buling stood at the entrance of the passage for a while until the fire was too big to stand. After making sure that no fish had escaped, he took Jiju and left the underground palace. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 766. The outside of Yulong Ridge was full of miasma. Even if the captured people came out of the underground, they did not dare to go out rashly. They all followed Chen Xining's arrangement and stayed on the grass outside the cave, basking in the sun that they had not seen for countless days and nights. Chen Xining stood outside the cave. She had been learning to handle cases since she was a child, and she had developed the character to think of the worst in everything. She did not relax her vigilance, and kept her hand pressed on the handle of the knife to prevent the remnants of the 100 Insect Valley from being lurked among the common people. Come on. Zhongli Chu-Chu and the little sparrow were also alert nearby. Chu-Chu just saw Chen Xining leaping several feet and forcibly stopping a huge boulder. Although it was not worth mentioning compared with Su Buling, among women, she felt that she was the best among women. At least Xiao Ning was still alive. It's not that powerful. Perhaps because he was a little bored waiting for Master and Su Buling, Zhongli walked closer to Chu-Chu and said, Miss Chen is very powerful. How do you practice martial arts? Chen Xining had only been in contact with Zhongli Chu-Chu for half a day, but she also noticed that the exotic girl next to her was not as good as her in any way except for her curvy figure, proud figure, and beauty. At this time, she subconsciously puffed up her chest and said with a smile, It's just so. Just practice more and that's it. Not enough words to speculate. Zhongli Chu-Chu pursed his lips, not bothering to talk about this self-esteem injurious topic, folding his arms and looking away. Chen Xining is a bit talkative. Once she starts talking, she never stops. She glanced at Chu Chu and asked curiously. The girl calls sister Zhongju master, and she and Su Buling seem to be quite close. What is your relationship? I haven't figured it out after thinking about it for a long time. Zhongli Chuchu felt uncomfortable talking about this, so he thought for a while, you will know later. Oh. When Chen Xining saw that Chu Chu didn't want to say anything, she naturally confirmed her suspicion. It was just a master and a disciple serving the same husband. For Su Buling's status, it actually didn't mean anything. It was just that Su Buletinling was more playful than she imagined, and even dared to do such a thing. The two chatted nonchalantly for a moment, and then Zhongli Juju walked out of the cave holding a pile of wooden boxes. Zhongli Chuchu stepped forward to help, while Chen Xining greeted the people sitting on the ground and left the place of right and wrong together. Although 100 Insect Valley was burned to the ground, the poisonous miasma and traps around it were still there, and there were also people from 100 Insect Valley outside, so they were likely to be ambushed on the road. Su Buling walked in front with the knife in hand and returned along the original route, paying attention to the surrounding movements along the way. Chen Xining has not spoken to Su Buling since she knew Su Buling's identity. Seeing Master Zhongli and his disciples accompanying Aunt Gui, and having a chance to be alone, she quickly came behind Su Buling. Master Su. Su Buletinling walked slowly with the knife in hand and did not look back. I have important matters at hand, so I can't reveal my identity. Princess, don't blame me. Chen Xining naturally had no intention of blaming Su Buling, nor was she qualified. She walked up to them, shoulder to shoulder, and thanked. Baekong Valley is a serious problem for the people of our court. After so many years of investigation, we have found no results. Instead, we asked His Highness the Crown Prince to come all the way to help eliminate it. This may be related to the incompetence of the government, but the Crown Prince's martial arts and kindness, it's really admirable. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. Su Buling chuckled. Dayu and Nanyu are brotherly states, and it is reasonable for them to help each other. Your Highness, the princess, does not need to thank me. When Chen Xining heard this, her beautiful peach blossom eyes moved imperceptibly. She ran over alone. In addition to praising Su Buling's courage and martial arts, more importantly, she asked about Su Buling's purpose. A few days ago, the Ziliang army fighting in the Chu region suddenly marched southward towards Liuzhu in large numbers, and their troops would soon approach the city. The South Vietnamese court was in a quarrel over this. They neither dared to show hostility nor let down their guard, and could not figure out what Dayu dynasty meant. King Su is the regent of Dayu, and Su Buling has great military achievements and high prestige. It can be said that he is already the young master of Dayu. He called South Vietnam a land of brothers, which was obviously a good sign. Chen Xining thought for a moment and said with a smile, Master Su brought the Ziliang army to South Vietnam, right, to save those 5 relatives and friends. If so, Chu's army would be of no use. Su Buling's eyes were dull. It's enough for me to save Aunt Gui and the others, so why bother bringing troops here? Chen Xining's smile froze slightly. She glanced at Su Buling and said doubtfully. Then Mr. Su, why are you taking the army south? It's not to attack our South Vietnam. How is that possible? Su Buling raised the corners of his mouth and smiled. Chen Xining secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but unfortunately before she had time to be happy, Su Buling said. Nkuagong Jochin and the second Prince Chenju colluded to murder the monarch Chenjin and bring chaos to the government and the public, causing wars and disasters for the people of South Vietnam. The people of Dayu and South Vietnam are brothers. Every year, envoys go to Chang'an to meet the emperor. After hearing this news, how can I just sit back and ignore it, so I sent my troops to help the Chen family of Nanyu to clear the king's side and prevent the traitors from usurping the throne and disrupting the throne. Su Buletinling said it calmly, but Chen Xining's face turned pale, with a little anger in his eyes. After all, Chen Xining is the eldest princess of South Vietnam, not a political idiot. Su Buling was full of benevolence and righteousness, and he always thought about South Vietnam, but he allowed Dao's most powerful Ziliang army to enter the country, and even entered the Qing dynasty in Beijing. When the Ziliang army arrived at Yangzhou City, would Chen still have the right to speak? It is directly equivalent to destroying the country. Chen Xining gritted her teeth, but she couldn't get angry with Su Buling. She just frowned and said, "Your Highness is a reasonable man. How could he listen to rumors and ruin the diplomatic relations between the two countries? My father had a stroke due to excessive drinking. My second brother has been working diligently since he became regent. Duke Angguo has been an official for more than 40 years and has made great contributions. It is pure nonsense to murder the monarch and cause chaos in the court. The recent arrest of able-bodied men has caused public resentment because the prince is fighting in the Central Plains and has no choice but to do so in order to protect himself. It is true that the 100 Insect Valley attacked your highness, but the 100 Insect Valley has been destroyed, and there is no evidence to prove that the 100 Insect Valley is related to Duke Angguo. You should know that the clues of the 100 Insect Valley were found by me for your highness. How could the prince vent his anger on our dynasty?" What Chen Xining said made sense, but Su Buling did not want to reason from the beginning. Reason is for people to hear, not for the country. He just needs a legitimate reason to send troops. Su Buling sighed and turned his head to look at Chen Xining. "It's useless for you to tell me this. I know Zhou Qin is Shangguan Qin He, and the Nanya court is even more riddled with holes. The entire Chen family has lost its voice. No matter how you defend yourself, you can't change the facts." Chen Xining's eyes were slightly anxious. "Even if it is true, this is also my bio's internal affairs, I can solve it myself." Su Buling raised his hand. "You can't solve it? The burning of the 100 Insects Valley will surely make Zhou Qin angry and will forcibly send troops to encircle and suppress me. Your second brother and Zhou Qin are in the same boat and will only help Zhou Qin. Your only solution is to support Chen Ju to take office, let Zhou Qin achieve his goal, and continue to trip me up in the future." Chen Xining walked in front of Su Buling and faced him. "My father has only 2 sons. The eldest brother died young, only Chen Ju can inherit the throne. If you want to get rid of Chen Ju, who will inherit the throne afterwards?" Su Buling spread his hands slightly. "I don't care about this. Anyway, Chen Ju can't get what he wants. These things are not what you should consider. You just want to find an excuse to annex Baiyu." Chen Xining gritted his teeth. "I think you are a gentleman and don't want to fight with swords. Our dynasty has never been disrespectful to Daoyu dynasty. How can you just find an excuse to mobilize troops against our dynasty? This is not an excuse. Your father, your mother, and even your brother who died young may all be Zhou Qin's tricks behind the scenes. When I kill him, you will naturally understand." Chen Xining also had some doubts in her heart, but it was impossible for her to turn her elbow outward and lead the Ziliang army into the pass just because she suspected Zhou Qin. She looked at Su Buling for a moment, turned around and left. "Since the prince is determined to do so, we can only meet on the battlefield. As long as I, Chen Xining, am still here, the prince will never step into Baiyu." Su Buling shook his head. Just now, Chen Xining rushed into the tomb passage to help him stop the stone wall. It can be said that she risked her life to help him. Although their forces are different, Su Buling does not want to regard Chen Xining as an enemy. Chen Xining disappeared in the capital, and the 100 Insects Valley was destroyed. There were so many witnesses on the scene, and the news that Chen Xining was with him could not be concealed. After Chen Xining went back, Zhou Qin would not kill Chen Xining for revenge or forgive her bygone days, but would only restrict Chen Xining and use her as a bargaining chip to negotiate with him. Because Chen Xining had cooperated with him and had a friendship, this was the only thing Zhou Qin and others could use. Su Buling did not like to be controlled by others, because if Chen Xining was really used as a bargaining chip by Zhou Qin, according to his style of doing things, he would not ignore it. In order to avoid that situation, Su Buling stepped forward and blocked Chen Xining. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 767. Chen Xining paused and looked at the hands in front of her. What? You brought troops here directly. The entire Bio court knows what you mean. Are you still afraid that I will go back and report the news? Su Buling shook his head. It's in danger for you to go back, so stay safe with me. Chen Xining's eyes were stunned, and she wanted to curse, and said to herself, you have brought troops to come and destroy my country. I still stay in front of you to be safe. What do I do in front of you? When the captured princess is humiliated by you to humiliate the South Vietnamese court. It was difficult to say these words, so Chen Xining put her arm around her and said coldly. I regard the young master as a friend and a knight. But we have different powers and we are really not destined to be together. We have to say goodbye like this and we will never see each other again. Snap. Su Buling raised his hand, and a hand knife fell on Chen Xining's fair neck. Before Chen Xining could finish her words, her vision went dark and she softened forward. She turned around and looked at Su Buling in astonishment before falling straight down. Su Buling raised his arms and put his arms around Chen Xining's slender waist, lifted it up and put it on his shoulders. He waited a little and found that it was quite heavy. Master Zhongli and his disciples were chatting with Aunt Gui. When they looked up and saw Su Buling knocking the girl unconscious, they were stunned. Zhongli Jiju's face turned red, as if she was worried that Aunt Gui would see her man's dishonest appearance, so she quickly ran up to him and asked. Ms. Sir, what are you doing? Why do you want to knock this girl unconscious? Two small snakes also emerged from Chen Xining's sleeves, looking at Su Buling in confusion. Su Buling carried Chen Xining on his shoulders and said with a smile, something will happen if she goes back now. Follow us to Phi Shui Ridge first. When the army arrives, I will send her back to Yangzhou City. Zhongli Jiju was dubious. She always felt that her man had fallen in love with Chen Xining's beauty and wanted to tie up a princess and let 3 generations of old, middle-aged, and young people sleep together. But as soon as the suspicious eyes appeared, Su Buling noticed it, raised his hand and was about to slap her on the butt. What are you thinking about? Zhongli Jiju didn't dare to be spanked in front of her parents, so she quickly dodged away, smiled, and changed the subject. I didn't think about anything. By the way, Mr. Gui, I just discussed with Aunt Gui. It's not easy for you to come to South Vietnam, and it's even less certain whether you will go to the stockade in the future. Chu Chu and I both grew up in the stockade. I didn't even say hello to Aunt Gui when I got married. How about having Chu Chu's wedding in the village? Su Buling naturally agreed 100% with this proposal. He turned back and glanced at Chu Chu. Chu Chu agreed. Zhongli Jiju glanced sideways at Su Buling, that's natural. Seeing that you came all the way to help the village to make things right, sister, I will be more aggrieved and teach Chu Chu how to serve you. Su Buletinling's heart skipped a beat and he glanced at Jiju approvingly. Xiaju is still good. What Xiaju? I told you in advance that Kikai is the eldest, Bao Bao is the second, Hongluan is the third, I am the fourth, and Xiaofu is the fifth. Chuchu, Manzi, King Yi, and the smelly Taoist nun all have to call me sister. Your name is Jiju. It's not right to be ranked 9th. Bah, why are you so heartless? Don't touch your sister tonight. I couldn't get out of the deep mountains and forests for 3 days, and I had to sleep in the wilderness at night. You can't sleep in the wilderness. Zhongli Jiju was about to speak, but suddenly realized something was wrong and quickly shut up. Su Buling curled his lips, nodded and smiled. Got it? What do you know? I'm not that stinky Taoist nun Ning Yu He. You are not allowed to mess around at night. He he. Hundreds of miles away, the inn at the foot of Yanshan Mountain. More than a dozen guests from the palace were patrolling inside and outside the inn where they were booked. Nightingale, wearing a long black flower dress, stood alone under the eaves, with big braids hanging on her shoulders, and a bit of boredom on her goose egg-like cheeks. She looked towards the south in the distance, waiting for the news from Su Buling. Information. More than half a month has passed in the blink of an eye. Su Buling made a lot of noise when she entered South Vietnam. All the hidden stakes in South Vietnam were reported, but the news that she went to provide support has never been sent back. Nightingale is not surprised by this. South Vietnam is just a small border country, and the rivers and lakes are just a small quagmire. When the young master enters, it will be like a powerful dragon crossing the river. If she still needs to run to rescue him, then there is a real problem. Compared with the safety of the young master, Nightingale actually missed the little sparrow more. She had almost raised the little sparrow, but she was suddenly taken away by Jeju, and she felt empty in her heart. However, at least she was closer to the young master, and she felt much more comfortable when she thought of De Man Zi sitting alone on the boat fishing. After looking at the door for a moment, there was no news from South Vietnam. Instead, a messenger came outside the inn and handed over a letter. Nightingale regained her serious expression, opened the envelope and took a few glances, then came to the second floor. In the room on the second floor, Ning Yu He and Ning Qingyi sat cross-legged on the futon and meditated. They had stayed in the Taoist temple on the mountain all year round and were used to living in seclusion, so they did not show any signs of boredom. Hearing the footsteps, Ning Yu He opened his eyes and asked with a smile. Nightingale, did you send a message? Nightingale sat down next to him and shook his head. This is the news from General Yang. The Ziliang army has arrived 200 miles away from Yanshan Mountain. It can take up to 4 days to get here. The surrounding soldiers have begun to mobilize. There are about 70,000 soldiers. They can attack the Yanshan Pass at any time. I guess there's no need to help the young master. Ning Yu He knew that once a war broke out, Su Buling would definitely join the army and would no longer be able to wander around in the world. Her trip was in vain, so she sighed. I should have gone into retreat with that bitch earlier. Now, let her occupy Linger for more than half a month. Although Ning Qingyi and her master had served Su Buling once, and she had also fed him herself, she was forced to do so. Her thin-skinned and cold personality had not changed. Hearing that her master's words were becoming more and more indecent, Ning Qingyi opened his eyes and interrupted. Chu Chu was watching her, so how could she have the chance to be intimate with Su Buling? I'm afraid she was scolded by Chu Chu and slept in separate beds. Master, don't think too much. Ning Yu He thought about it and felt that it was true. Just look at the pitiful appearance of Zhongli Jiju being bullied by her apprentice. Even if she was given the opportunity to be alone with Su Buling, she would not be blessed to have fun every night. She felt better at the moment, closed her eyes and began to meditate again, waiting for the news that Su Buling would let her go into retreat. Nearly 200 people were walking in the forest. The mountains were rugged and there were no roads. Most of them were the old, weak, sick, and disabled who had been tortured. Among them, there were some poor people who were tortured crazy by drugs. It was definitely not easy to walk fast. However, after escaping from hell, everyone wanted to return to the world as soon as possible. No one dragged their feet. They all gritted their teeth and followed the team's footsteps until they couldn't walk anymore in the middle of the night. They rested on the spot in the valley and ate some dry food collected from the underground palace. Chen Si Ning was knocked unconscious by a slap. At this time, she had woken up. In order to prevent Chen Xining from waking up and making trouble, Su Buletinling tied her up with a rope into a tortoise shell and blocked her mouth. At this time, she leaned against a big tree, her eyes full of annoyance. When Chen Xining woke up just now, she thought Su Buletinling had done something to her, but after a careful examination, there was nothing unusual on her body. Chu Chu and Juju were still sitting in front of her, and their attitude towards her did not change. Chen Xining felt relieved after seeing this, and she argued with Su Buletinling again, hoping that Su Buletinling would stop attacking Nanyu or let her go. As a result, Su Buletinling, the bastard, did not listen to her at all, and even blocked her mouth with a handkerchief. Chen Xining knew that Su Buletinling had no ill intentions towards her, and her status could not threaten the Nanyu court to open the door. At most, she would let the Nanyu court bleed and return her. She was angry, but not very nervous. If you don't let me go, then don't let me go. What's the matter with blocking my mouth? You can imagine how uncomfortable it is for a chatterbox to have his mouth blocked. Especially now, Zhongli Chuchu took the rations to help feed the two little snakes, and Aunt Gui sat next to her, asking about every detail of the past 2 years. Although Zhongli Chuchu didn't have as good an eloquence as Manzi, she could still explain it roughly, and told all the experiences from all over the world, such as Su Buling's battle with Xuechenzi, Su Buling's battle with Chen Daozai, Su Buling's battle with Sidu Yuejin. These are all contemporary heroes that Chen Xining has heard of since she was a child. Anyone who practices martial arts would admire them. But the girl in front of her is very bad at telling stories. She doesn't have any details, and her moves and techniques are a mess. Chen Xining's heart was like a cat scratching. She wanted to ask this and that, but her mouth was blocked and she couldn't ask. She could only watch Zhongli Chuchu skip the key plots. It felt better to knock her out. On the hillside behind Chen Xining, Su Buling and Zhongli Juju were on guard in a secluded grove. Su Buling stood behind a big tree and saw Chen Xining's uncomfortable look, and smiled with the corners of his mouth raised. Zhongli Juju leaned against the big tree with his legs on Su Buling's arm. He couldn't make any sound with his mouth covered. He could only look at Su Buling with tearful eyes, like a kitten forced into a corner, looking at his messy husband pitifully and aggrievedly. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 768. In early winter in October, when the last petal of the golden chrysanthemum falls, thousands of miles of rivers become increasingly desolate, reminding everyone that another winter is coming. The high-rise boat is still docked along the Xiangjiang River. The girls on the boat have become accustomed to the days of waiting. After all, major events in the world cannot come in a hurry. The short wait now is for the long-term future. Without the company of 2 pairs of masters and apprentices, Zhu Manzi calmed down and went fishing on the river to relieve his boring days. But she doesn't know what's wrong. She can catch all kinds of things, but she can't catch any fish. Even the 2 good dogs no longer accompanied her, because the tortoise could not chew, and only the big white goose was still swimming around under her feet, taunting her mercilessly. Well. Zhu Manzi sighed softly and kicked her skirt boredly. Nothing was going on the boat. Song Yufu was also sitting in front with a fishing rod. She didn't know how to do it at all. She was just fishing with Manzi. Seeing Zhu Manzi sigh, she asked. What's wrong, Manzi? Can't catch any fish? You can also catch a tortoise, it's quite delicious. Zhu Manzi pouted and became even more unmotivated. She really wanted to find someone to chat with her. Unfortunately, Yufu couldn't understand her bragging. The other sisters didn't know martial arts and were not interested in Jianghu affairs, so she could only waiting for Xiaoning to come back. Although Xiaoning is a boring gourd, at least he will listen to her nonsense. On the 2nd floor of the building, Xiaoqi had been sitting behind the desk for a long time. Her waist was a little sore, so she got up and walked around the room. Lu Hongluan was sitting on the couch embroidering. He raised his eyes and asked softly. Kikai, is there any news from Ling Er? When will you be back? Xiao Qi picked up the teacup and took a sip, and said with a smile, it's almost time. Angwo Gong Jochin's lair has been slaughtered, and his position has been messed up. He is forcibly sending troops to attack Liu's Hu, which has made the South Vietnamese ministers dissatisfied. Wait for the opportunity. When the troops arrived, the Ziliang army entered the pass and marched straight into Yangzhou city, and the matter was over. Lu Hongluan didn't quite understand the overall situation of the world, so he thought for a moment, can we pacify South Vietnam by just taking down Yangzhou city? Xiao Qi shook her head, South Vietnam is too loose. From Fuzhou to Jiaozhai County, there are nearly 100 forces, large and small. They just respect the Chen family as the king and obey the Chen family's orders. Even if the Chen family is destroyed, we can't get there. All the forces have to be wiped out and they can reach the city of Yangzhou, and let the Chen family surrender and agree to remain on the throne and continue to govern southern Xinjiang on behalf of the Central Plains Court. Lu Hongluan frowned, then what if you don't agree? As long as you don't agree to change someone named Chen to inherit the throne, it won't be too late to go back and clean up after the 4 eastern kings and northern Qi are destroyed. It's not a big place anyway. Lu Hongluan nodded and did not ask further questions. Xiao Qi actually wanted Su Buling. After all, she and Xiang Er were twins, and their bodies were not much different. After eating the marrow and getting to know its taste, she couldn't bear the days of being alone in the empty boudoir. She wished she could be pinned to the table by Su Buling right now. Waste. However, Xiao Qi would definitely not say these words, and glanced at Lu Hongluan. Hongluan, do you want to make a promise? Lu Hongluan was not shy at all. He nodded and looked towards the back of the shipbuilding. I definitely want to think about it, but I'm used to it. There's nothing I can't bear. Even Queen Kui's side, alas, looks pitiful. Xiao Qi glanced at the terrace behind her from the window, sighed quietly, and didn't know what to say. The waves lapped against the edge of the boat, and the boat heaved slightly. The cool river breeze swept across the terrace, and the 2 pots of flowers placed next to the lounge chair were still withered, and the beautiful figure watching the clouds roll and relax on the lounge chair was gone. Ahem. A slight cough came from the back room. Xiao Xiang who was wearing a bright red dress with a worried look on her face, stood beside the bed and watched the doctor taking her pulse seriously. Kui Zioan had a towel on her forehead and 2 quilts covering her body. Her face was a little pale, but her eyebrows were curved and her expression was not uncomfortable. Except for the occasional cough, she looked the same as usual. I saw Xiao Xiang biting her lower lip, her eyes full of worry. Kui Zioan took off the towel on her head and said crisply. Mother, I'm fine, don't worry. I just fell asleep outside enjoying the cool air and got a bit cold. Mother almost covered me to death. How could Xiao Xiang not be in a hurry? She was busy working in the house a few days ago and fell asleep on the table without paying attention. When she woke up in the middle of the night, she found that Zioan had also fallen asleep on the terrace. It took her a long time to wake her up, which frightened her. Since then, Zioan has been coughing frequently. The doctor woman came to check carefully and said that she had suffered from cold and had taken medicine, but it had been several days and she still wasn't feeling better. When Kui Zioan was in the palace, she was so delicate that she was worried about falling whenever she walked. Now that she is really sick, if the root cause of the disease is found, she, the guardian mother-in-law, will regret it for the rest of her life. Xiao Xiang sat down by the bed, her almond-shaped eyes widened slightly, she put the towel on Kui Zioan's forehead again, and lectured like an elder. You lie down honestly, even though you're coughing, you still say it's okay. It's so cold at night, and I forgot to call you, and you don't even know how to come in? How old a girl you are. Kui Zioan huddled in the quilt and said with a smile. I'm asleep, I don't feel cold. Well. Xiao Xiang'er shook her head and didn't know what to say about her nominal daughter-in-law. The doctor took her pulse for a moment, but the result was the same as last time, and she said with a smile. Madam, Miss Kui's pulse is stable, but her body is a little weak. If she can replenish her body and feel more relaxed, she will be fine. Xiao Xiang'er also hoped so. After letting the medical girl go down, she raised her hand to bring the medicine bowl, picked up the spoon, blew on it, and brought it to Kui Zioan's mouth. Drink the medicine quickly. Kui Zioan sat on the bedside, took a sip, then frowned and thought. It's so bitter, why don't I accompany my mother to drink, get drunk and sweat, maybe I'll feel better. Xiao Xiang'er looked helpless, and put the spoon to her thin lips. Take the medicine first, and then I'll accompany you to drink after you finish. Kui Zioan blinked, and perhaps felt that she couldn't avoid it, so she brought the medicine bowl over, tun and swallowed it in one gulp, then stuck out her tongue and tears came out. Xiao Xiang'er quickly picked up the cane sugar and stuffed it into Kui Zioan's mouth. It's bitter, isn't it? I told you to sit outside and enjoy the breeze, but I won't allow you to do that anymore. If Su Buling comes back and sees you like this, he'll say I didn't take good care of you. No, mother, he loves you. Kui Zioan paused for a moment, looked at the dark clouds outside the window, and hesitated. By the way, when will he come back? I heard from my sister that he will come back in a few days after finishing the South Vietnam business. Why, do you miss Su Buling? Isn't mother thinking about him too? Kui Zioan huddled into the quilt, holding Xiao Xiang'er's hand, and smiled sweetly. Xiao Xiang'er had nothing to do on the boat, so she sat by the bed and began to tell the stories Su Buling had told her before. Although Kui Zioan had heard them all, it was better than sitting together with nothing to say. But Kui Zioan didn't seem to be very interested in the story she had heard. After listening for a while, she closed her eyes, as if she had fallen asleep, and her holding hands loosened unconsciously. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 769. A few days later, Phi Shuling. At dusk, at the foot of the Niang mountain surrounded by terraced fields, the scattered Miao villages were brightly lit. Young men and women from the 18 villages ran over to gather around the bonfire in the center of the square, and the sound of singing and gongs spread throughout the mountains and fields. As Su Buling sent Aunt Gui and others back to Phi Shuling, the 20,000 Ziliang troops led by General Yang Zunyi also arrived outside Yanshan Pass and joined Yu He and the others. They could bombard the juncture at any time and drive straight in. However, once the war started, there would be no free time. For this reason, Su Buling asked Yang Zunyi to gather the surrounding soldiers first, and take advantage of these few days to hold a wedding exclusive to Chu Chu in Chu Chu's hometown. Zhongli Jiju said before that they like thick and strong men here, which is not a lie. According to the custom of the 18 villages, the more powerful a man is, the more respected he is. If he wants to marry a girl in the village, he has to wrestle and wrestle. Fight for wine, and only if you win can you pick up the girl, which is the so-called bride grabbing. In order to give Chu Chu a perfect wedding, Su Buling naturally followed the local customs. At this time, he put on the clothes of the Miao village, stood in the middle of the singing and dancing crowd, and accepted the challenge of the 18 villagers. Of course, the challenge was just a performance. If Su Buling let go, no one in the 18 villages could resist a finger, and that would be too humiliating for her family. At this time, they were all trying to look like they were sweating profusely and worried about each other, to make the onlookers happy. The village was noisy with singing and dancing, and the Banpo courtyard was also decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations. There was a sense of joy inside and outside. The boudoir in the west wing had the words happiness plastered on it, and the bed was covered with a bright red quilt. The little sparrow Yi was covered with a red vest, and she stood in her birdcage swinging in despair. The door to the room was closed tightly. Zhongli Chuchu did not wear the bright red dress that she usually liked. Instead, she put on Miao clothing from southern Xinjiang. She was covered in silver jewelry from head to toe. The silver shined under the red candle, and she was as white as a sheep. The fat face and red lips looked particularly charming, especially the pair of green cat eyes that look like gems, which add a bit of exotic charm. However, there was no joy of getting married on Zhongli Chuchu's face. Instead, she was a little confused. She was sitting on her shoulders in front of the dressing table and twirling her hair. She couldn't move around and could only say anxiously, "Master, we just came back in the morning. We didn't even rest. We held a wedding in the evening. How could it be so fast? At least, let me prepare for it at least." Zhongli Chuchu had figured it out. Last time, her master said that she would get married in South Vietnam. She had no idea in her mind, so she let her master make the decision. Anyway, the three of them were already like this, and they would get married sooner or later. But she didn't expect the master to be so anxious. He didn't even catch up on her sleep when he came back, so he locked her in the room and asked people to invite all the villagers from the 18th village. Zhongli Chuchu became restless at the thought of having a drink with Su Buring and consummating their marriage later. She and Su Buring had known each other for a long time, but their intimate behavior only included cuddling and kissing twice. Suddenly, she came here. Who can adapt to it? Zhongli Juju's mentality of quick victory to avoid long nights and many dreams can make Chuchu enter the door earlier, and the big stone in his heart will fall to the ground earlier. At this time, he comforted. It's better to choose another day than to hit the sun, and to hit the sun is not as good as today. You let master make the decision, and I made the decision for you. Do you want to go back on your word? I have invited everyone here, so I can't let all my fellow villagers go back, right? I don't regret it, it's just, I was too hasty. I don't know anything. At least let me discuss it with Su Buling, right? Hashtag send 888 cash red envelope hashtag follow the VX. Official account book Friends Base Camp, watch popular masterpieces, and draw 888 cash red envelopes. The wedding will be done later, and you have some time to discuss it. A woman only gets married once in her life. She has no experience and is nervous before getting married. That's not all. When I married Su Buling, I was even more in a hurry than you were. I got married as soon as I thought about it, but after thinking about it, it actually didn't matter. Marriage is a lifelong matter, and getting married is just a process. The key is how we live together after getting married. How could Zhongli Chuchu understand the life philosophy of these experienced people? She clutched her skirt and thought for a moment. Then what should I do later? Just pay homage and wait for him here? What happens after that? Zhongli Juju straightened Chuchu's cheeks and continued to put on hair accessories. You don't need to think about these things. Just do whatever Su orders you to do. He won't eat you. Zhongli Chuchu pursed his lips. He was still panicking, but he didn't know what to say. He could only wait restlessly. Soon, the sky turned completely dark. Outside the courtyard, King Zhu ran over with a group of little girls and shouted at the door. Aunt Ju, Sister Chuchu, the time has come, Brother Su is here. Zhongli Chuchu's heart tightened when he heard this, and he hurriedly sat back on the bed and asked his master to cover his face with the hijab. There was a noise outside the room. Aunt Gui and many relatives and friends came in, laughing and congratulating each other. Although many elders knew that Juju had married Su Buling, they had nothing to do with Su Buling's identity and the identity of the villagers. In comparison, what does it mean to marry another Chu-Chu? If she wasn't afraid that Su Buling would look down on her, Aunt Gui would have let Su Buling pick as many as she wanted in the village and marry as many as she wanted. Su Buling was surrounded by enthusiastic crowds and came to the small courtyard. He had just sweated a little from wrestling with the men in the village. He was also wearing rugged Miao clothing. He looked very different from the usual stern young master, and he was a little more professional. The savage sunshine that belongs to men made many girls in the village dazzle at the sight. Su Buling walked through the crowd of Deoxy, half crouched in front of Chu-Chu, and said with a smile, "Chu-Chu, come on." Zhongli Chu-Chu was so panicked that he kept trying to peek at the master next to him, but his face was covered with a hijab and he couldn't see anything. After struggling for a long time, he relied on his feeling and lay on Su Buling's back. Whoa whoa! There were boos and shouts all around. Zhongli Chuchu's face turned red, and she lay on Su Buling's back. She did not dare to speak loudly, but spoke quietly. "Su Buling, why don't you discuss it with me? We just came back." Su Buling hugged Chu-Chu's legs, walked out of the courtyard through the bustling crowd, and said with a smile, "Didn't Juju discuss this with you?" Zhongli Chuchu's head was still covered, and she pursed her lips. "I just let her make the decision for me, and I didn't say I would marry you so soon." Su Buletinling paused and turned his head. "Then, how about we forget it first and wait until we get back to the ship to hold the wedding?" Zhongli and Chuchu were already being carried on their backs. How could they have the nerve to regret their marriage and say that they would not marry? After thinking about it, he still hugged Su Buling's neck and rested his chin on his shoulder. "Forget it, if you stretch your head and shrink your head, it's just the same thing. That's it anyway." Su Buling smiled and said, "You are so good." As he said this, he walked down the hillside and walked along the outskirts of the huge Miao village, followed by the men, women, and children from the entire 18 villages. According to the custom of receiving a bride in the village, the man should enter the house and carry the bride back to his home. Su Buling's family is thousands of miles away in the northwest, and they certainly can't travel that far. However, Zhongli Juju is Su Buling's daughter-in-law, and Juju's yard is naturally Su Buling's. Therefore, the process of getting married involves going around behind Chu-Chu's back, walking around the cottage, and then back to the courtyard. As soon as I walked in and out, I changed from a girl waiting to be married to a new daughter-in-law. Although Zhongli Chuchu couldn't see the surrounding scene, he could still feel how many people were following behind him. He was inevitably nervous and embarrassed, so he lay on Su Buling's shoulder. "Actually, there is no need to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't seem to be very excited." "Well, there is no special feeling." Su Buling hugged Zhongli Chuchu's legs, walked among the beautiful terraces, and said with a smile, "There is nothing special that feels right. In the end, the relationship between a man and a woman is to live peacefully together, without so many earth-shattering love-hate entanglements. We have been together day and night for more than a year, and we have cried and made trouble. It's thousands of miles apart. When we are together, there are also times when we treat each other coldly. After everything is over, you still like me and I like you, so naturally you don't feel much about a ceremony that confirms a relationship." Zhongli Chuchu blinked under the hijab, remained silent for a while, took off the ice flower hibiscus pendant from her waist, held it in her hand and rubbed it gently. "Yeah." Su Buling smiled softly, carried Chu-Chu up a little, and strode across the terraces. "The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 770. The village square was noisy, with thousands of men, women, old and young gathered together singing and dancing. According to local customs, the village would be lively all night. After Su Buling finished the process, he carried Zhongli Chuchu back to the small courtyard halfway up the mountain. The moon was already high in the sky. The children who followed him to play were taken away by the adults, and the small courtyard with red lanterns became quiet. The main room was decorated with lights and 2 armchairs were placed under the central hall. Zhongli was like a teacher and a mother. At this time, she was naturally Chuchu's elder. She sat on the chair, maintained a dignified demeanor, and smiled at the bride and groom who came in. On the other armchair, the little beetle was carried out again, lying down as a witness. The little sparrow also stood beside it, stepping on the little beetle to prevent it from running around. Su Buling carried Zhongli Chuchu on his back and put her down in the main room. There were only 3 people left in the room. Zhongli Chuchu's tense mood finally relaxed after returning to the courtyard. Standing in front of the armchair, she asked in a daze. "Master, how do we worship? Should Su Buling sit on the chair or stand with me?" Zhongli Jiju sat upright, posing as an elder. "Be serious. Today I am your master. Su Buling has to call me, mother-in-law. A woman only gets married once in her life. Don't play house. Get red envelope cash or point red envelope has been issued to your account. Follow the WeChat public account book Friends Base Camp to receive it." Su Buling was very serious, but looking at his beautiful and charming silly wife, he felt a little strange in his heart. He pulled Chuchu closer and said with a smile. "Okay, let's start." Zhongli Jiju sat up a little straighter, looked at the couple in front of him, and said seriously. "First bow to heaven and earth." Zhongli Chuchu felt very strange in her heart. She said that she didn't treat it as a child's house, but her master slept with her man. How could this be a formal wedding? She hesitated for a moment, but still turned around and bowed to the outside. Second bow to the parents. After the sentence came out, the atmosphere in the room became even weirder, and even Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips, feeling a little embarrassed. Su Buling's expression was cold and extraordinary. He stood side by side with Chuchu and bowed to Zhongli Jiju seriously. Zhongli Chuchu bowed and saluted, and suddenly remembered something, and said, "Master, where do you sleep at night? Chen Si Ning is locked up in your room. Don't talk, be serious." Zhongli Jiju's beautiful eyes slightly glared, scolded Chuchu, and continued. Husband and wife bow to each other. Zhongli Chuchu was still very obedient at this critical moment, without saying anything more, turned around and bowed to Su Buling. They were both tall, and their foreheads touched. After the ceremony, Zhongli Jiju breathed a sigh of relief and raised his hands slightly. "Send to the bridal chamber." Su Buling supported Zhongli Chuchu's arm and turned to walk towards the boudoir on the west side. Zhongli Chuchu was a little panicked at this time, clenched her hands tightly, looked back at her master, and wanted to ask how to go to the bridal chamber, but the veil blocked everything and she couldn't see anything, and it was hard to say it out loud, so she could only be supported by Su Buling and return to the familiar boudoir. There were red candles burning in the boudoir, and the word happiness was posted on the window. It was not big but very warm. Zhongli Chuchu has lived here for many years. Even with her face covered, she is still familiar with the place. She walks softly to the embroidered bed and sits down. She clasps her hands tightly together, unable to hide her nervousness, and says, "Is that all? What next?" "SHH. Su Buling walks up to her and lifts up the veil covering her cheeks with a scale. Under the dim light of the red candle, her jade-like cheeks come into view. Her nose is high and her eyebrows are like paintings. Zhongli Chuchu's green eyes are a little flustered, flickering left and right, not daring to look at her. She purses her thin red lips tightly and subconsciously hides back. She is wearing a dark blue dress with silver ornaments all over it. It shines with a moving luster under the candle light, just like a moist pearl in the night. As the veil was lifted, Zhongli Chuchu saw Su Buling's smiling face and became even more panicked. Although she had seen her master and Su Buling messing around, She had never been touched by Su Buling. Her heart was beating like a deer, and she didn't even know what to say. Su Buling put down the veil, picked up 2 cups of bitter wine brewed in the Miao village, and handed them to Chu. "My wife." Zhongli Chu took the wine glass and felt like she was dreaming. Her mind became more and more confused. She opened and closed her lips for a long time before she said in a mosquito-like voice, "My husband, my husband." As he said this, his arm passed through Chu's wrist and drank the wine in the glass. Maybe the prepared wine was too bitter. Zhongli Chu frowned after taking a sip, and she was about to hold back tears. She covered her lips with her sleeves and quietly stuck out her tongue. Su Buling put down the wine glass and said with a smile, "Now it's done, go to sleep." When Zhongli Chu heard the word sleep, her face was obviously a little nervous. She hesitated for a long time, and said inaudibly, and sat still. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, spread out the quilt, then took off his outer robe, lay down on the pillow, and patted his side. Zhongli Chu and Su Buling were both familiar with each other, but she had never experienced these things before, so how could she not be shy and nervous? She hesitated for a moment, and slowly lay down beside Su Buling, folded her hands on her stomach, closed her eyes, and looked like she was at your mercy. The night in October was already very cold. Su Buling raised his hand to pull up the quilt a little, tilted his head to look, and asked in confusion, "Chu, what are you doing?" Zhongli Chu's face was so hot that he didn't dare to lean on Su Buling, and said blankly, "I didn't do anything, what's wrong?" Su Buling looked a little helpless and raised his hand to take off the more than 10 kilograms of silver jewelry on Chu's body. "Don't you feel uncomfortable sleeping with your clothes on?" Only then did Zhongli Chu remember this. He sat up again, took off the complicated silver jewelry on his body, and unbuttoned his dress. Zhongli Chu had never taken off her clothes in front of Su Buling. At this time, her back was still facing Su Buling, and she took a long time to take off her clothes. Zhongli Chu was born in the western region. Her figure is hotter than the women from the Central Plains, and her skin is much whiter. In addition, Zhongli Juju has taken good care of her since childhood, and her skin and body shape are flawless. She can make 99% of women envious of her just because of her lines. Zhongli Chu could notice the gaze behind her, but she didn't dare to look back or speak. She took off her coat in annoyance, and when she was about to untie her skirt, footsteps suddenly came from the door, and then Zhongli Juju pushed the door open. Walked in furtively. "Ah!" Zhongli Chu was startled, her face suddenly turned red. She held her clothes in her arms to cover them up, and said a little shyly, "Master, what are you doing?" Zhongli Juju closed the door, smiled playfully, walked to Chu and sat down. "You still call me master? We are all one family. It's time to change your words." Zhongli Chu's eyes were embarrassed. He guessed that the master would do something random, but he didn't expect that the master would really dare to do so. How could she have the nerve to be intimate with Su Buling in front of her master? She gritted her teeth and said, "Master, today is my bridal chamber. If you want to make trouble, just go out and play some music." "What are you doing here?" Zhongli Juju has no interest in playing music. He has settled the scores with his master and his apprentice. He has been trained by his apprentice for so long and has finally dragged his apprentice into trouble. How can he not get back all the embarrassing experiences he suffered before? Zhongli Juju raised her hand to pull away the dress that Chu was holding, and lay down on Chu's shoulders. "I won't compete with you. You don't know anything. What's wrong with me teaching you as a master? Or are you married and treating me as a teacher as an outsider?" This is not a matter for outsiders. Zhongli Chu didn't dare to look at Su Buling next to him. He just covered himself tightly with the quilt and said with a red face, "Master, Stop making trouble, what are you talking about? Zhongli Jiju didn't care about this. He opened the quilt and got in. He lay in front of Chu Chu and pushed his apprentice in. Go and sleep inside. Master, you. Zhongli Chu Chu was caught in the middle. She wanted to kick her master off, but she couldn't bear it. Just as she was hesitating, she was hugged by Su Buling. With a smile on his lips, Su Buledenling covered himself with the quilt. Okay, go to sleep, stop making trouble. How can we sleep here? Why don't you go to sleep and I'll go out first? Zhongli Chu Chu couldn't bear it, so she stood up and climbed over Jiju to put on her clothes. Zhongli Jiju's eyes lit up, he rolled over and rolled to Su Buling's side, smiling. You are still sensible and know how to respect your teacher, so you are not polite as a teacher. You're welcome. This is my bridal chamber. Zhongli Chu Chu moved for a moment, he really had nothing to say to his own master. After hesitating for a long time, he lay down and said, Xiaju, get out of the way. Hey, no big or small, husband, take care of her. Good. Oh, you too, don't, master, I was wrong. Rustling, fighting and making noise. In the small courtyard under the bright moon, the red lanterns swayed gently with the night wind, and the sound became urgent and slow until the wind stopped and the rain stopped, leaving only the warmth and tranquility of the garden.